This is Stuck, and in this video we are looking at the Berlin Crisis and the Berlin Wall. So first of all, we need to look at the Berlin Crisis. Now, throughout the 1950s, the West had poured money into West Berlin, which had made West Berlin into an exemplary capitalist state, and the comparisons with the communist East Berlin were visible to all. Nevertheless, by 1958, the US had fears about the development of Soviet technological advancements. Now, this meant that Moscow feared that the US would ultimately place nuclear missiles in West Germany. Now, therefore, Khrushchev wanted to minimize US intervention in Germany, and he believed that the Soviets needed a propaganda victory over the US. Now, any success in Berlin would also validate the USSR as the dominant communist power, with growing pressures from China. Therefore, on November 27, 1958, the USSR issued a 6-month ultimatum to the West. Now, this stated that Western troops had to be removed from West Berlin, and Berlin was to be declared a free city. Now, if the West were unable to negotiate a suitable settlement, the USSR would negotiate a separate treaty with the GDR. Now, this would give all Soviet rights in Berlin to the GDR and would threaten Western occupation of West Berlin. Now, the West would therefore have to recognize the existence of GDR, making the Hallstein Doctrine irrelevant. Now, the Hallstein Doctrine was part of the foreign policy of West Germany, and it stated that West Germany would not maintain diplomatic relationships with any state that recognized the GDR. Now, although the West rejected the ultimatum in December, they did want to lessen the confrontation with the Soviet Union. Now, this meant that the British Prime Minister Howard Macmillan visited Moscow in February 1959, and Khrushchev participated in Camp David talks with Eisenhower in September. Now, these came to nothing, yet they did worry Konrad Adenauer that the West may betray West Germany. So the next big event in Germany happened 2 years later, and this was the Berlin Wall. And Khrushchev had initially aimed at avoiding closing the East Berlin border, but by 1961 he had little choice. Now, this was because West Berlin was a geographical loophole in which many talented East Germans were able to flee to the West. Now, in fact, around 3.6 million Berliners had already fled to West Germany, and already in 1961, 10,000 GDR citizens has emigrated to the West. Now, this would have affected the economic growth of the country, and it was seen as an embarrassment that the West was so desirable. Therefore, the East German Chancellor Walter Ulbricht persuaded Khrushchev that action was required. Now, this meant that on 13th of August 1961, work began to physically seal off West Berlin with the use of barbed wire and concrete. So, there were many effects of the Berlin Wall. And firstly, Khrushchev had effectively handed the US the finest propaganda tool to show that capitalism was superior. Now, Kennedy even made his Ich bin ein Berliner speech, which offered solidarity towards West Berlin. Now, the GDR's immediate economic program, however, was solved because skilled workers were now unable to leave. And the lack of a response shown by the West shows that they had reached some recognition of the GDR, and this was an end to the Hallstein Doctrine. And the wall, however, did also act as an alternative to nuclear war, and this can be shown by the fact that Kennedy even said that the US would consider nuclear weapons if everything else failed in saving Berlin. So that is the story of Berlin in the late 50s and the early 60s, obviously a crucial point of a Cold War throughout. So thank you for watching, and see you soon. Bye.